It's easy to forget that, by the start of the Second World War, aeroplanes had only been around for 30 years. Aircraft design was still a new science, and no one knew exactly what the aircraft of the future would look like. For all the successes of the Supermarine Spitfire, the B-29 Superfortress, and the Messerschmitt 262, there were legions of failures. Wildly uncontrollable, monumentally slow, and prone to exploding, these are the absolute worst aircraft of the Second World War. In 1935, the British government put out a tender for a 3-man, twin-engined aircraft for use as a torpedo, bomber, and recon plane. 2 designs were accepted, the Bristol Beaufort and the Blackburn Botha. But before things could be finalised, the government changed the specifications. Now, they wanted a 4-man aircraft. This called for more powerful engines, but they weren't available. The designers tried to call off the project, but they were overruled. The Blackburn Botha had to make do with what it had. What it had were 2 930 horsepower Perseus engines and an extremely heavy airframe. It lumbered around the sky at just over 180 knots and had no rear-facing windows and minimal visibility out of the side. The Botha was about as far from a fast-moving recon plane as it could possibly be. Still, 442 were ordered in 1936. By the time the air war over Britain had begun in 1940, the Botha was considered a death trap. Experienced pilots struggled to keep it under control, and a series of fatal crashes cemented its reputation. Bothas were moved back to training squadrons, but it did even more damage there. Of the 478 sent to training squadrons, 24 were lost at sea following engine failure, and another 145 crashed on land. Scores of novice pilots and crewmen met their ends trying to land the lumbering beast. By 1944, the design was scrapped. Across the channel, the Luftwaffe was having design problems of its own. The Messerschmitt Bf-110 was outdated, and they were working on something new to replace it. The result was the peak of German engineering, the Me-210. On paper, it looked great. 2 powerful engines, a bomb bay to reduce drag, and state-of-the-art remote control guns. The problem started, however, as soon as the Me-210 took off. In the air, the experimental plane shuddered wildly. It was totally unstable in turns and had a nasty habit of stalling and then going into a deadly spin. The second prototype was lost this way, the test pilot bailing out after deeming the spin unrecoverable. More prototypes and design modifications changed nothing, and pilots soon dreaded having to fly the Me-210. Messerschmitt chief test pilot Fritz Wendel went so far as to describe it as having all the least desirable attributes an aeroplane could possess. The project was rushed through, and by April 1942, Luftwaffe units were receiving new Me-210s. The airmen hated the planes and generally believed that getting inside them was about as safe as playing Russian roulette with a Panzerfaust. Within a month, production was halted and a redesign was in progress. The redesigned aircraft was designated the Me-410 in an effort to convince the Luftwaffe crews it was a different plane. It seems the aircraft manufacturer Blackburn brought no end of trouble to the Royal Air Force during World War II. One of their carrier-based fighters, the Roc, proved to be so useless it only shot down a single enemy plane. The Blackburn Roc was designed in 1936 amid the wave of British enthusiasm for so-called turret fighters. These were fighter planes with a rear-facing mobile turret fixed behind the pilot's seat. The air marshals envisioned squadrons of turret fighters intercepting bombers and shooting them down with interlocking machine gun fire. It made sense to those who'd learned to fight in the static trenches of World War I, but the theory was outdated by the 1930s. Nevertheless, the Roc's development went ahead. It took off for its maiden flight in 1938 and quickly proved too heavy, too slow, and sluggish in maneuvers. The Chief of Naval Air Services, Alexander Ramsey, tried to scrap the whole project there and then, but he was overruled. Production continued, and the Blackburn Roc was ready for combat in time for the Allied campaign in Norway. Operating from the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, Rocs flew out to intercept German bombers. It was here, however, that a fatal design flaw was discovered. The Blackburn Roc had no forward-facing guns, meaning it could only shoot sideways or backwards, and it was significantly slower than German aircraft. Combined, both factors made it impossible to engage in combat effectively. On its own, a Roc never managed to shoot down a single enemy plane. By late 1940, the Roc had been withdrawn from frontline service and given over to target towing and training. Some had their turrets removed, and when fixed in the ground, these proved excellent in anti-aircraft defense. But not all of the war's worst performing aircraft started out with poor design choices. The Italian Breda 88 was, in fact, a world record holder for speed. So what went wrong? The Breda 88 Lince was designed in 1936 to fulfill what many at the time believed were totally unrealistic expectations from fascist Italy's Regia Aeronautica. Mussolini's men wanted a fighter bomber that could reach a speed of 530 km per hour and also had a range of 2,000 km. This was faster than any aircraft yet made. The Italians succeeded, and in 1937, their prototype broke the world speed record over a 100-km stage by averaging 554 km per hour. It broke another record later that same year, reaching an average speed of 530 km per hour over a 1,000-km stage. Fascist propaganda lauded the achievements of Italy's designers and engineers. The Breda 88 was destined to be the next evolution in aerial warfare. And then it failed, spectacularly. To fit military specs, the plane had to be loaded with over a ton of ancillary equipment. Radios, weapons, and ammunitions all substantially increased the aircraft's weight. For a precision racing machine, this weight increase was crippling. To make matters worse, Italian technicians fitted sand filters to the air intakes when the planes arrived in North Africa. This cut the plane's power by more than half, with some proving so cumbersome that they couldn't even take off. With their planes literally unable to fly, Italian ground crews stripped them for parts and scattered them around decoy airfields. An ignominious end for the pride of Italian engineering. While the Italians were struggling to get their wonder plane into the air, the Germans were struggling to land, particularly with the Messerschmitt Me-163, otherwise known as the Komet. Interestingly, this pocket rocket was not one of the inventions that resulted from Hermann Göring's 1944 emergency fighter program, a last-ditch effort to retake control of their skies from the scourge of the Allied bombers. The Komet had actually been in development since 1937 and first flew in 1941. In October of that year, it set a world speed record of 1,004 km per hour, a record that would not be surpassed until well after the war. The Komet's incredible speed came from light construction and a liquid-fueled rocket engine. The brainchild of engineer Helmut Walter, the rocket fuel, a substance called T-stoff, was so reactive that it exploded when it came into contact with organic matter. More than a few pilots and ground crews were seriously injured or killed by the Komet's fuel alone. But in the war's final days, this was a price Göring was willing to pay. The Komet's speed meant it couldn't be intercepted by Allied fighters, thus leaving Allied bombers vulnerable. The counterpoint was that the Komet had only about 7 seconds of fuel before it became a glider. This was all the time the pilot had to shoot down an enemy. Once the fuel was spent, the Komet was a far easier target. Komet pilots racked up just 9 kills over the course of the entire war. Walter designed the Komet to glide exceptionally well. Perhaps too well, as a small gust of wind could easily lift it out of its landing approach into trees, a hill, or a building. Some 80% of Komet pilots were killed trying to land their snub-nosed rocket planes. But for a time, they were effective, which is far more than could be said for many of the planes featured here. But what do you think? Was bad theory or bad design responsible for these aerial mishaps? What do you think it would have been like to fly an Me-163 Komet? Which are your top 5 worst planes of the Second World War? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.